Hello guys, and welcome to another Call Hub webinar. We are here to try and understand a little more about micro-targeting in this session over there, and I'm quite happy to have Andrew join with me. So, just if as while everybody settles down, let's have like a moment of just for introduction. What are you hoping to learn here in terms of micro-targeting? I suppose like it does get a bit of a bad rap because everybody's worried about like who's spying on you or who's like looking at all your information. But when it comes to like politics, when it comes to non-profits, for example, there are like ethical and reasonable ways to use things like micro targeting to help you properly understand your audience and understand like the people who are actually going to make a difference to your campaign or maybe to your fundraiser or whatever it is. And we are trying to find out, how do you find these kind of people and how you actually make it work in a way that you don't get overwhelmed by a lot of data, but at the same time, it makes it work for you in a way that makes success happen. And that is why we are really, really glad to have like Andrew with us, who is pretty much, a definition of success in that term. He has been working in this field for over a decade. He has worked with Obama. He has worked with Bernie Sanders. He's even worked with like Bloomberg for mayor. It kind of stands out in his survey. And he is currently the president of Haystack DNA, which is a firm that provides like analytics and strategic consulting services for political services, even for nonprofits and any lots of agencies. The whole idea is that we should find out, how to make it work for us, and hopefully we all like learn a little something today. So, hi Andrew, that's over on to you.
Thank you very much, Vinayak. Appreciate Call Hub hosting this event today, and just want to welcome everybody to today's event. If you have questions during the presentation, Willie Desmond, Vice President at Haystack, is on the presentation as well. He'll be available to answer some of those questions as they go on. Otherwise, we're going to have question Q&A at the end, so look forward to any of your questions. Have about a 20-25 minute presentation today, and then we can get to questions, but just wanted to go over some of the basics of micro-targeting and what it is, and how it can be used for campaigns. So Haystack, I'd like to say that we pioneered the field of using data and analytics, otherwise known predictive analytics, known as micro-targeting, to persuade people in high-stake audiences. We have done a lot of work, as mentioned. We did the Obama 2008 campaign, where we were with the then Senator early on throughout the primaries and caucuses, and then on to the battleground states. And it was really a well use of bringing micro-targeting into the mainstream. Since then, we've worked on campaigns as small as city council races all the way up to additional presidential races, most recently for Bernie Sanders in 2020 and 2016. Also working with the Biden campaign this year. So it's really being used across a lot of our political clients, from statewide to congressional down to, as I mentioned, city council. As mentioned, we have non-political clients as well. We've really been able to do this all the way from selling Audis to selling biscuits for our client tutors biscuits. So it's been an interesting way to bring our data into a lot of different spaces and to a lot of different clients. Working for nonprofits as well, advocacy organizations, helping to find donors, helping to find people who will make those calls to members of elected officials to help them push their agenda. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about what micro-targeting is. The definition, throwing it up here, is the science of taking what we know about some voters and combining it what we know about everybody to build statistical models that allow us to use predictions about individual voters' attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, whether that's an attitude on a particular issue, whether that's a behavior of are they voting or not? Are they going to early vote? Are they going to do absentee? What is it? How are they going to do this? So just breaking that down, why do you want to do this? Why would you spend the money, resources to do micro-targeting? And what we do, we've had campaign managers of like, how much will this save us? Well, campaigns are not run as a business. It's, if you're running your campaign, you're spending most of your dollars right to the end to make sure that you're winning. But what we can do is we can maximize your resources. Voters' attention. So if you're sending out a piece of mail, if you're sending a text, if you're doing a phone call, and you're reaching out to these individuals, what you're really doing is you want to make sure that the message that you get in front of them is the message that's going to resonate. So if you're sending something and you're talking about education, we would know if education is one of their top issues versus the environment versus abortion. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this to make sure that you're targeting in. Next, you're saving money because you're going to be more efficient. We're going to talk about this a little later, of being able to hone in and target those individuals who are going to be persuadable, or those who are already with you, but they need that effort to get out to vote. So you don't want to send something to people who are already with you to persuade them. That's sort of a waste of your resources. You could go lower into the list and find somebody who's a little bit more persuadable. At the same time, you're not going to spend money telling somebody who's votes in every single primary, every single special election, every single campaign. You're going to be smarter about where are you spending your money. And second, and then finally, time, both your volunteers' time, your candidates' time, everybody's time that's involved here. You're going to be able to better spend and use your time with employing microtargeting. And it allows campaigns to know who to communicate, what's the best message or messenger to use in this. So there's lots of reasons why microtargeting makes a lot of sense. So the science of microtargeting comes down to taking what we know about some people, adding in what we know about everybody, combining statistical techniques and creating statistical models, blending those models. And then at the end, you're making predictions about everybody else. You're giving a score 0 to 100 on these individuals to say, here's somebody who's most supportive versus somebody who's least supportive on an issue, a candidate, an action. Just taking these 4 things, and let's just drill into it a little bit more. We're going to start what we take about some people. So what we're going to do is we're going to do phone calls, we're going to do surveys with not everybody, but certain individuals who populate an area, and we're going to get their attitudes and beliefs. And we're going to ask a script. This looks like a survey where we're going to go in and we're going to ask some questions. How likely are you going to vote in the presidential election? You might ask, whether they are very liberal to very conservative. You may ask who the candidate that they're supporting. So there's all this information about drilling down and figuring out what these individuals that you're going to talk to, what they know. Next, we're going to add in what we know about everybody. What does that mean? So we have a voter file. So we know all about the voters. So we have that information. When did somebody register? Are they a voter? Are they not a voter? Do they do absentee? There's obviously a number of states that are mail ballot only. So in those states, it's you know that they're going to receive the ballot, but knowing if they are somebody who's going to come in early or mail in their ballot early or late is valuable information to know. Second, what other information do we have on everybody? We have census data. Census provides a lot of different information. We can drill down to the census tract level, group level, and even the block level at certain for certain data points to help understand who these people are and what sort of habits they are, generally speaking. Next, we have commercial data. Well, we only have a couple columns highlighted here. We usually have hundreds of columns of information, whether or not somebody rents or owns, whether or not what type of magazine that they read, education, children in the household. We have tons of information, shopping habits. We have tons of information that we can populate on this. And this is the ID data. So we don't know this about everybody, but we're eventually going to be able to fill in that. So then next, what we're doing, we're combining the statistical techniques. So we have a number of different ways to pull in data. So we're going to take data that we have in-house. on whether household compositions, children versus non-children in households. We have a number of different models that we have built out on religion, ethnicity. We have our issue models that I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And we have any models, or not models, but any information that we have from the campaign. So if you're coming to us and you have, hey, we've talked to hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, we have, if you have that information, that's a great start. And there's a lot of ways that we can do models just off of that would be help, for the campaigns right off the bat. Then we have the data team at Haystack. What they're going to be doing is creating multiple predictive models. We don't rely on one specific program. We're usually using 5-6 different techniques. Here's a list of some of them in creating those models. And then one thing that we do is we blend those scores together to give you the best prediction. And then that allows us to put a final score on everybody in the voter file. So what we're doing, the last step here, is making predictions about everybody else. So we talk to all these dots where you see the little phone icon here. And what we're doing is then we're applying scores to all the other voters. So we don't have to talk to every voter. We're talking to a small, very small percentage of them. That allows us to make predictions on everybody else. And then this is just an example of somebody here. We didn't talk to this person, but we know that their partisanship score is 79.56. So 80 on the partisanship. So you're able to message this person with a particular message. So as we talked about before, we are then applying scores to everybody else in the voter file. So 0 to 100. So that's when we talk about a score, we're talking about a number that the campaigns can use, and in a different way, in many different ways. So if they are going, for the best, and they want to say, all right, we're doing fundraising, we want to go to our top supporters, you want to go to the top score here. If you want to say, we're going to combine this score, a support score, with something else, there's ways such as turnout. Then we say, all right, this person's super supportive of us, but we need to give them that extra push to turn them on. So how do you target with scores? So there's a number of different, utilizing the scores, there's a number of different ways that you can do this. Voting behavior usually comes down to, really, campaigns are about two things. It's about turnout and support. So, it's you're spending money to get a voter to support you. And then once they support you, you're spending money maybe to turn them out. So micro-targeting can help you find the best audience for both of these efforts. How do we do that? So just putting everybody on sort of a grid. If you look at the left, we have turnout; on the right, we have support. And if we like to do this nine grid, 9-box grid for us. So on the upper right, those are the individuals who are always going to support us. On the upper left, those are the individuals who will never support the candidate or the cause or buy the product, whatever it is that you're doing. And then you can see on the left, those who are always voting versus sometimes vote, never vote. It would be great if campaigns could put everybody in one of these buckets, because then you can sort of see, all right, those who are strongly opposed to us, they're off the table. We're never going to spend resources. In an ideal world, you're never going to spend resources on them, just because campaigns have limited resources. It's okay to skip individuals. You can, those who are never going to vote, for you, you just want to skip them outright. Next, we talk about the upper right, where strong support, always going to vote. So we'll know who those people are. You're not going to spend money to say, hey, get out to vote, because they're a strong voter. You're not going to spend money saying, here's why you should vote for us, because you already know that they're with us. So using these scores, you can sort of determine. Now, candidates admittedly get a little anxious about this, because they say, hey, our best supporters are not getting any of the mail. And in an ideal world, that's what you want. You want sort of this idea of like you shouldn't be having to spend money on your best supporters. But candidates get a little anxious, understand that. But that's something you just have to work through and talk through. And there's times where it's like, all right, we're going to send money to our kitchen cabinet. We were going to send it to the finance committee so that they see that money is going to be spent. Next, you don't want to spend money on those who are never going to vote. They may be with you, and you can convince them all you want to turn out to vote, but there's going to be individuals in certain campaigns that are not voters. Same thing with the undecided. There are no shows. You're not going to spend money on them. So this leaves 3 boxes left. It's first the persuasion targets, those who are always going to vote but aren't necessarily with you, aren't against you. That's where you're going to spend a lot of your money and convincing people to say, send them, whether it's text messaging, phone calls, mail, digital ads. Those are the people that you want to put into your persuasion target. Next, you have those who are already with you, so you're not going to spend time convincing them to turn out for you, but you want to support you. Rather, you're going to spend money in convincing them to get out and vote or send in that ballot if they have the ballot, whatever it is. So that's sort of where we are here. And then finally, depending on resources, you have this middle audience of persuasion and get out the vote targeting. That's sort of a second tier for both of that. Those who are undecided and sometimes vote. You just want to make sure that you are talking to them as well. So then, you take away the boxes and it becomes a little bit murkier. And this is where we can come in and really help figure out who's in each of these boxes. And that's where micro-targeting can be used pretty efficiently. Just wanted to talk a little bit about what we have done for Bernie. As we mentioned, the scores were being used in a number of different ways on the Bernie campaign. The one thing that, one big difference between Obama in 2008 and Bernie 2016, 2020 is a lot of the silos were gone and taken away. So what we had here is we were using, we used scores for fundraising. Who will donate, whether or not they were a $2.70 ask, a $27 ask, or a $270 ask is, we were able to put people into those buckets. How frequently they are going to donate to the campaign. Are they somebody who's going to be spending, willing to send in a donation every month of $27, or are they somebody you want to hit up once a quarter, for example? And then high dollar, which is, sort of, I should put that in quotes. Bernie did not have big high dollar fundraisers, but we do know that there was individuals who gave him maxed out at $2,000 plus. And we were working with the finance team to figure out who are those individuals that are giving small dollars, but then can be bumped up to higher dollars. So we did all of that for him. Next, the field operation, whether it was phones, texts, doors, and this was in COVID. So this, was critical to have. Who are the supporters? Who are the persuasion votes that we want to go after? And it was very important that we had this during the campaign, and we were working closely with the field operation to make sure that we were targeting them rightly. Same thing with digital ads. We know who the best targets are to be feeding these ads. We weren't wasting resources on people who would never support us in the Democratic primary, whether they were supporting Biden or Warren or Buttigieg. We had a good sense of who those people are. And at the same time, as candidates dropped out, we knew who we could go after, of like, who were the crossover votes between Harris and Bernie, for example. We were able to go after those individuals in a way because we had built scores not only on Bernie, but the top candidates in the race. Impeachment travel. This was an interesting, as some of you remember, there was an impeachment going on leading up to the Iowa caucuses in January of 2020. And we were working with the scheduling and advance team because Bernie had to be in trial every day from 9 to approximately 5 o'clock in the Senate, listening to the trial. But we were able to say, all right, here's, we had the ability to get Bernie within a 2-hour flight of DC. Where did we want to go? And we were able to look at the data to say, here's the best, here's the best audience. It might be in North Carolina, even though that their primary wasn't one of the first 4. We were able to, bleed into the South Carolina media market. We were able to get a bunch of people showing up. We knew, had a sense of how many supporters that he had. So they were able to use us and rely on us to figure out where they should be sending him. So that was one unique way that we used it there. TV placement based on delegate math. So a state like California, you have different TV zones and cable zones, and we could go in and say, all right, Bernie is strongly supported here, or he's close to additional delegates in these areas. So we were able to place ads strategically based on a lot of the delegate math. And then finally, we were working with the pollsters, overlaying the models on the polling so that they had a read, on it. So this is, I think, a big lesson learned from previous campaigns that were run in 2016, where polling or micro-targeting said one thing, polling didn't necessarily agree with that. So it was a check on each. And I'm not saying it has to match up 100%, but if there's an explanation of why it doesn't match, that's what you want to know. And I think this is an important lesson where, I like to say that, you're data informed. There's going to be people on the ground who have a better sense of what's going on. So you're listening, you're looking at the data, but you're also bringing in common sense into a lot of this, and you're bringing in what people are saying on the ground. And then the other one thing that we're really proud of, early on in the campaign, we knew California was going to be the big get. It was on Super Tuesday, and we were able to go in there and figure out who the MPPs are, because MPPs could get a Democratic ballot, but they had to request it. So we were able to go in there, and approximately a third of the voters in California are MPPs, no party preference, sorry. And we were able to go in there and say, all right, here are Bernie supporters. And so we were able to reach out to them and say, ask for your Democratic ballot so you can participate in the Democratic primary. And then again, finally, using our scores to find niche groups like union supporters. For example, if they were doing an event and in an area where it was union focused, we were able to go in and say, all right, here are Bernie supporters or likely Bernie supporters. And by the way, given this event is union focused, we have a score on who's likely to support unions or not, to drive that message, to get that message out there, to get people to the events. So lots of different ways that the Sanders campaign used us smartly in 2020. Just final few minutes, just have a few more slides, just talking about what other services that we have. So one of the things if you're sitting here and you're saying, hey, this all sounds great, we don't have we don't have the ability to spend, lots of money like a presidential campaign for these scores. What we have is we have off-the-shelf scores. So on the voter file right now, 214 million Americans, we have over 100 different issue scores. Each individual voter on there has a score for behavior, for hundreds of different issue models, whether they're activists, turnout, behavior being turnout score. We have some consumer focus, candidate support. We have Trump v. Biden, Trump v. Biden v. RFK. We have some COVID-19, scores that are on there, education, environment, healthcare. We have everything from ACA supporter to abortion rights. So we have hundreds of scores, and these can be purchased for as little as $500 or your organization. depending on how many voters that you want these applied to. So Willie dropped in the link into the chat. So if you want more information on this, by all means, go check it out. Next, we have a service that we've been doing, just started over the last couple of years is, and this is where we've talked to Call Hub about this specifically. You go to Call Hub and you have, a list of supporters. And one of the things that we have here is we have the ability to append, additional information, whether it's phone numbers, cell numbers, addresses. So what the process is you send us over information on, that you have. So if you have, 50,000, people in your list, but you only have telephone numbers for 25,000, send it over to us. We will take it, we will match it against the voter file and or the consumer file and add as many possible numbers as we can. And what we do, we come back and we have those, we have the ability to come in here and add in numbers. So what we do that, we give you a report to say what's available, and then you have the ability to purchase, and we deliver those within 48 hours. Cell phones are only 3 cents a record, so if you want additional cell phones, we can add those in. If you wanted emails verified, this should be verified emails are 5 cents a record. And then if the other service that we offered that we've been doing a fair amount of recently is really email verification. So if you send us a list of emails and you say, we want to make sure these are valid before we blast them out, we can do that as little as 1 cent a record. So that's another service that besides the Haystack scores that we have available for a lot of our clients, we also have the appends, and this has been popular. Final 2 slides I think here is just wanted to show an example what this looks like. We had somebody recently come to us and they said, oh, we want to look at your green buyer score. So if you were looking to buy a big purchased item such as as we have here, a car or a washing machine, or getting solar panels, that's a big investment. What's most important consideration? Low upfront cost, long-term savings, or environmental impact. So we're able to see here what the darker green here is those who really want to do environmental impact. Here's zooming in and looking at one of those sections, what we overlaid it with here. The blue is just those who were very high on the green consumer score. The other thing is we have a rideshare user score. So the red is just those who are high on the rideshare user score. In this particular client, they wanted a combination of both. Those who would be, green consumers plus rideshare. So you see the yellow dots are really honing in on individuals. So we have this down not only to the household level, but individuals into the household. So this is just wanted to show how granular that we can get. Great. And then finally, just wanted to give another thanks to our partners at Call Hub for hosting this today and having everybody come on. If there's additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. Put my email on here. Willie's dropping this information in Slack as well. We have a newsletter once a month that goes out. So if you want to join that, just drop an email to social@haystackdna.com and you can get added to the newsletter. So with that, I just wanted to thank everybody. I know we have some time left over to answer any questions that people may have.
Okay, that was pretty informative, Andrew. Thank you for that. A couple of questions from my side, just so we start. I found like what you said about like some candidates, for example, would come to you and ask, like, okay, is this the right approach? I found that kind of interesting in the sense that I would think that if they're paying you, whatever amount of money they're paying you, they would trust you blindly. Do you often feel like candidates question like the methods? Like, is it something that we should question, or do you prefer if you trust the system?
I think it's important. anybody who's spending money, even Bernie Sanders was like, what are we spending? What is the value of this? And understanding what they're getting. I remember, and I think one of the things that Haystack as a company has shifted in the 20 years that we've been around, there was times where we would hand off scores to a campaign, and we wouldn't hear from them again, and they would go off, and some campaigns used it, and there was times where we reached out after the election, and we said, oh, curious, how did our scores perform? We're relatively new at this, and they would say, oh, they worked great. We were very impressed on how we were able to talk to people. There's other campaigns that didn't use it because the campaign manager said, we need to do predictive analytics. We need micro-targeting for our campaign, do this. And we found out, we shipped the scores over to them and they sat on a shelf. So one of the things that we've made it that's important for us is working with the campaigns, working with the users, the end users of these scores, whether it's in the field operation, whether it is the digital firm, the fundraising firm, the partners who are doing the texting, the calls, understanding what these are. And I think that's very important to, if you're going to pay for this, like we pride ourselves in making sure that there's an understanding. Now, you're not going to understand all the nuts and bolts on how these are built, but once the scores are built, we're going to train you on what is the score, what does it mean, how can you best use it? And we're often working with campaigns throughout the process. Okay, the scores are ready, they're going out, they're knocking doors, they're doing texting, they're asking for money, and then they come back and they say, hey, this has performed well, this hasn't performed well. So this is something I think it's important to understand what you're getting and value for it.
Okay, makes sense. But yeah, since most of the people, like for example, in this webinar, and even generally, we are like users as such. I mean, so we would expect to use this. Do you feel that a lot of time, like users, like average users like us, get kind of like stuck with perhaps like the wrong number or the wrong idea, and then you have to like convince us saying, okay, no, whatever this says, you have to interpret it properly, or do people kind of figure it out pretty much on the fly?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And what we often say is, and I'm sure you do this a lot with your clients as well, is like test something, test a message, test, a fundraising ask, test something to start with and grow it from there. Usually the rough, people are like, what scores, the interesting question that sometimes we get is, campaign managers will say at the end of, we'll present this. We used to get, this question of like, all right, based on this, who should we talk to? And the answer is you should talk to all voters, but you usually don't have the time and resources. So we're scaling it back and say, all right, if you're going to be sending 50,000 text messages on an education message or on a turn out the vote message, who are the best 50,000 that you're doing? So you can really, work backwards in terms of like saying, here's your best audience. As you mentioned, there's few campaigns that have endless resources. You mentioned the Bloomberg mayoral race. That was one of the few that had endless, but there's most campaigns, most people on this call are like, we have a limited budget. So we want to be smart about how we're spending our money and just not going out and texting all voters, but we want to text the ones that are going to make the difference, who are going to support us or donate to us.
I mean, yes, billionaires generally do have unlimited funds, that's for sure. But I think that is interesting. Based on your experience in like, let's say the decade or so that you guys have been specifically doing this, can you give us a rough idea about what percentage of voters we should consider like, okay, that's a safe percentage of voters to speak to and you will get a good idea? Like, is it like 5%, 10%? How does it scale?
I think it can scale like, and part of this is, if you have 50,000, if you have the budget to do 50,000 text messages, start with 5,000. See what the response is. So 10% of your audiences, you're going to have a good read. And from that, we may say, hey, you want to go lower in the score, or you want to go higher in the score based on what you've done. So, starting, starting small and then growing from there, I think is very important. Even, you're going to get some feedback early on, whether or not this message is resonating with people, whether or not the people that we're targeting are the right people or not. And sometimes that doesn't matter. And, it's like, we're going to go for this broader swath. We have hundreds of volunteers that we're going to be, working with Call Hub to reach out to individuals. Or on that's something where it's like, okay, we have a couple of clients where they had a lot of volunteers, and what they were finding is they would run into some voters who were aggressive towards them or sort of rude and mean. And there's ways to cut out people who would not support you. So like, that's another way. It's like, okay, at the very least, we're going to cut out, the most adamant, Trump supporters, for example. We have a Trump support score. So taking out those voters, you have your universe, and at the sort of the last cut is taking those voters out who you're like, all right, we're never going to convince them, or they're just going to be rude to our volunteers. I think that's important because you don't want to burn out volunteers, and we've had feedback that's been successful. Are you going to eliminate everybody? No. Are you going to eliminate a lot of the people, undesirable people that you don't want to talk to? Yes. So there's different ways to use the scores depending on what sort of function you're doing in the campaign.
I mean, that's like really interesting. I'd not even considered the idea of that. Yeah, you can actually remove, like you said, like hardcore Trump supporters and Tea Party supporters, and be like, okay, they're not going to support us anyway. But that did give me the idea, like, so you've been doing this a long time. So I found that interesting, like, from like, let's say like Obama's time to like 2020 Bernie Sanders time. Have you found that generally, for our knowledge, like the things that you should like micro target, has it changed? Or is it that, okay, like in a hypothetical situation, could I use like a database from like, let's say Obama's 2008 campaign, and would that still help me in like 2020, or like have people's tastes changed like dramatically?
I think that's a good question, because it depends. It depends on sort of the issue. We can look, we talked about our national scores that we have. We've been doing that for almost a decade. And the support on, let's take two topics. Let's take abortion, and let's take gay marriage. Gay marriage, the support for gay marriage has shifted over time as people have become more accepting to that. So that's a score where, if you're using a score from, a decade ago, it's still like, it's not as if it's not valuable, but I would recommend updating that to make sure that you're talking to people that, because attitudes on that are going to be shifting. So on abortion, that's a, even with Dobbs, we've seen, the split on that, become a little bit more polarized. But, the people who were supporting pro-choice versus those who were anti-choice, that shift hasn't gone huge, over time. That has been a score that has, been pretty stable over time. And as new voters come into we're able to, predict that pretty well. But, another thing on scores and how fresh are they, how good are they is like, how big is it in the news? For example, we didn't have a, support the score, the war in Ukraine, or opinions of Ukraine 3 years ago, but now we do have that score. So that's been very in the news. We have a score that we just turned out last month on the conflict between Israel and Gaza and Palestine. So that is something that is brand new. And if you would have asked that question, 10 years ago, not as much news around it, not as much focus on it. So the scores would have been more, not as, broad speaking, now you have people who are definitely on one side or the other of an issue like that. So it's really, definitely things have shifted over the time, but there are some scores that just, are not huge, shifters. And again, public infrastructure, score that we have, that might have, not has been that important. But if you're in Baltimore and in the Washington, D.C. region and the cargo ship that hit the Key Bridge, last month, like that is still like people's ideas of that might shift around it. So it all depends on what the news is. And you could say, hey, Andrew, you built the score before this happened. And I would say, great, we rank order our scores from most supportive of spending more money on infrastructure to least supportive. And you're still going to be able to find great targets to talk to in that.
I mean, that is interesting since it's best to have the freshest data as well. Somebody in the comments had also asked about like mass texting, whether you provide databases. So I suppose that so you guys have your databases, you have your own sets, but I mean, I couldn't help but notice, but like, for example, one of your clients, something like HBO or maybe like, I don't know, like Audi or Mercedes, they would run their own surveys from time to time because these are like legacy companies. It would be the same, let's say the DNC, now they have been running elections for like 150 years or something. So they have their own this thing. Do you feel that, where is the clash between like the data that you have versus, let's say, the legacy data that they bring, that they maybe feel like, hey, you know what, we use this a lot. And how do you pitch it to say that no, our data is better? You have to use the latest one that we are generating.
Yeah, and I think that's a good question. Speaking of like Audi or one of our corporate clients, it is interesting, like just seeing what their investment is in data science and AI, for example, and how that has shifted. Some of these companies are a little stuck in. We've run into corporate clients that are global 100 clients, companies, and they're like, we don't need this. This is the way we've been doing it for years. And clearly it's when we come in, they are a little defensive of what we do. So it's a matter of like explaining what we do and what we don't do. So there's, when we first started this business, I think pollsters were a good example of people who were sort of defensive on this. And they're like, oh, you don't need micro-targeting because we do that. And we're like, no, we don't do polling. What we're doing is we work with the pollsters. If a pollster says, 2/3 of the electorate are supportive of this message, we can help you find who are those best targets within that 2/3. So if it's 2/3 of women with, married, 20, who are married 25 to 50 and have children, knowing who out of all those, let's say 200,000, and you have a, budget so you can send 100,000 texts. Who are the best 100,000 that you want to spend? Like that's where we're working together with pollsters, because not all 200,000, the pollster knows 1/3 of them are not going to be receptive to this message, but we know 2/3 are. So who are those 2/3 out of the 200,000? And I think like the DNC, yes, they have operations in house that they've been doing. We work with them on, what we're doing is we've been doing this for 20 years. So there's a lot of custom indicators, custom models that we have built that we've been able to use that feed into the models. So every project that moving forward, we're taking learnings from past projects and inserting in them in. So an organization like the DNC, has high turnover. So they don't always have like the top, the top data scientists and stuff like that have been there for the 2 decades that this has been on the scene. So that's where we come in, work with organizations like the DCCC, DSC, or the DNC, and like working with them to say, all right, here we're going to bring our expertise and know-how into this. And yes, you might have scores from Obama 2012, Obama 2008. those are a great start. But think of the millions of people that have been added to the voter file since then. Think of the millions of people who've moved since then, tens of millions of people who have moved across states. Think of the tens of millions of people who are no longer on that because they might have passed away, for example. Like, yes, that's a great starting point, but you want to make sure that you are doing this on a regular basis, because you're not going to have scores on everybody from 2008, because a lot of people weren't voters, or a lot of the voters that were there are no longer with us. So, or they've moved, and tracking them and having an understanding of where they moved to is important as well.
True. In these kind of like sort of like you had to mention like niche topics, right? One of my favorite bizarre things is like if you had gone like 5 years back, or perhaps even 10 years back, and asked somebody like who drinks from a Stanley Cup, it was mostly like construction workers. That was like the big thing with Stanley Cup. It would hold your soup warm and stuff. And today, if you took a survey, I bet like 90% of the customers are like teenage girls. Or Swifty. So there would be like some parallel between like if you like Taylor Swift and whether you bought a Stanley Cup, which I presume would blow the minds of somebody who was selling Stanley Cups like 5 years ago. So I do find that kind of this thing. I was interested just from your own personal experience whether you have ever seen these kind of like sudden change. Like, is it that the Gen Z, for example, as you mentioned, millions of them are going to be voting in the current election, 2024. Do you find that Gen Z is changing a lot of the old data, and like, do we need to put a lot of like attention on them? Like, for example, if I was selling Stanley Cups, if I paid attention to Gen Z, like, I'm making bank now. So is it the same for like politics? Is Gen Z the more focus now for micro targeting?
I would say that any new group of voters are always going to be a new focus, and that's something that campaigns are often like concerned about. Now, this is where we would come in, and let's say a campaign picks up on that and says we're going to capitalize on this idea of creating the our candidate, Gen Z. We're going to have a candidate, style Stanley Cup, for example. And, it's like they come back to us and they say, who do you think would buy this? And this is where we can come in and say, all right, we have scores on these people, we have some habits on these individuals, and we're able to go in and use that information to say, here are the people that you would most want to, here's the people that you would most want to market to say, to buy the Stanley Cup. So so it's a continuous use of information, what we have, and bringing, especially the new voters. I mean, that's something that we spend a lot of time on, and new people added to the voter file. This isn't the same as 2016, where we knew Bernie Sanders would get 85-90% of support of the young people, and we're like, all right, we don't really need to target those individuals because we're just going to go after the broad swath of young people. Now the Biden campaign, you can look at polls and you can see that the young people are divided, between RFK, Trump, and Biden. And this is where it's like really critical to say, all right, we can't use an old technique that we used, in 2016, 8 years ago, to really hone in and target on these individuals, because the support has changed. It's shifted a little bit. And we see the same thing with Latinos, for example, where, it's, they are not, as a group, not a one monolithic, all support one, one party or another. They're split, and helping, we saw that a lot, like a lot of Latinos in California are NPPs. So we were able to go in and figure out, okay, here's somebody who will be resonating with Bernie's message versus here's a Latino that is an MPP that, more conservative, not resonating with Bernie's message. So that's the importance, is really help focus in on who you're going after.
I mean, yeah, thinking of like RFK Jr. and Biden, when RFK Jr. began his little campaign, people were like, okay, he's going to take votes away from Biden. Now it seemed more like, there was a recent poll in which it seemed that, he's taking more votes away from Trump actually than he is from Biden. I found that interesting because, like, so if you take whatever, let's say that we're having an election in Boston, and like, we take your data, and you everybody is targeting the same set of voters at some percentage, right? So there's going to be some overlap. Do you feel that we need to be like, when we use your data, should we be worried about like, hey, okay, the opposition is also micro targeting the same people, and what if they have different issues? Is that like a concern, or does your data kind of fix for that?
It's I think a campaign, can only like they yes, you want to know what the opposition is up to, but at the same time you have to run your campaign and you don't know exactly what the opposition is up to. Every campaign is about persuadable voters, like figuring out who those persuadable voters are. So if the Trump campaign, for example, is going to spend a lot of money trying to support strong Democrats to vote for Trump, I would say that's an odd move. But if they're going after, Biden supporters who might be high on economic anxiety and stuff like that, that's something that the Biden campaign in turn will see starting, they should be seeing across all the efforts that they're doing of like, here we see where Trump is spending money, we might want to do a counter offense to that to make sure that we're shoring up those support. A lot of times I'll talk about shoring up your support with candidates or campaigns of like, all right, it doesn't hurt if you're starting early, like start talking to these people. So you're not reaching out to them, a week before the campaign, that you're talking to them months out.
My internet currently just fluctuated there for a minute, but yeah, just I mean, as we close up, I was just considering, like in terms of like a final question as such, because this was something that we had thought about when we had asked for this webinar, which is okay, like I want to win an election, right? So do you prefer it if I just show up to your office, for example, and say, hey, you know what, here's the election, this is when it's happening, I want to win it, and you give me the data that will help me understand, what are the things that I should focus on? Or do you prefer it if I come say, okay, I have a vision and I kind of want these kind of voters, and it's better if, like, for you to help me find those voters? Like, what works better for you in terms of like clients?
I always authentic candidates, I think, always do best. So if you have a policy, if you have positions that you already take, I think that's very important to come in, because then we can help connect you with those voters. So if you're a progressive candidate running in a less progressive area, like, we're not saying don't shy away from your message, but here are people, here are the voters that you are going to talk to. But if we know that somebody is going to be, a little bit more of a moderate Democrat versus a progressive Democrat, you might not want to talk, identity politics with them, and you might want to talk fiscal, positions with them. So that helps you, and you're still being authentic. So you're not, shying away from, but what you're doing is you're connecting an issue that would matter to them, that they would resonate a little bit more better on. So it's yeah, definitely, I think, coming to us. We've had, there are certain situations where we've had clients come to us and say, we just want the, here's the issue that we're going to do. We're going to fundraise on, choice, for example, but give us your choice voters. And they already have the message, they already have, sort of the vision, but it's we use the scores to help find candidates. So if you come to us and you're a state party and say, here's an area that we're trying to find candidates, can you help us find candidates? We'd look at the scores and we'd say, all right, here's roughly the type of candidate that you want to recruit for that would do well with within that area. So yeah, it's mostly the former, where you're coming to us with here's our positions, here are our ideas, here's our vision, and using scores that way, versus the latter of tell us how to campaign. I like to say we want to be data informed, not data driven. If you're data driven, you're letting the numbers or the numbers lead you around. So that's the one thing we often recommend.
All right, that's like I think it's a great place to like end this, to be like data informed, not data driven. So thank you, Andrew, so much. It was very informative, and I'm really happy for all the questions and all the great presentation. So thank you so much, and we do hope that you'll join us some other day on another webinar.
All right.
Let's wrap this one up. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you to you and everybody at Call.
Bye.